The role of a prison warden is meant to be one of control, rehabilitation, and justice. But history has shown that some of these individuals have instead used their power for greed, violence, and corruption. While the world often focuses on the crimes of prisoners, the men and women in charge of these facilities have sometimes committed atrocities far worse than those behind bars. From bribery and extortion to murder and human trafficking, corrupt wardens have turned prisons into personal empires of crime and suffering. One of the most infamous cases of prison corruption took place at the Angola prison in Louisiana, where Warden Burl Cain ruled for over 2 decades. Under his leadership, Angola was known for its brutal conditions and allegations of forced labor that resembled modern-day slavery. Cain was accused of using inmates to work on his personal projects, including his private home, while also profiting from questionable business deals within the prison system. His resignation in 2016 came amid a state investigation into his financial dealings, but many believe his abuses were never fully uncovered. Across the ocean, Brazil's prison system has been plagued by corruption for decades, and at the center of it was Antonio Pedro de Cerqueira, a warden who ran the notorious Anigio Jobim Penitentiary Complex. Under his rule, the prison became a hotbed for gang activity as he allowed powerful criminal organizations to operate freely in exchange for bribes. Guards under his command reportedly smuggled weapons, drugs, and even prostitutes into the facility. The situation spiraled out of control, culminating in a 2017 prison riot that left 56 inmates dead, many of whom had been brutally tortured and beheaded. One of the most shocking cases of warden corruption came from Russia, where Alexander Reimer, the former head of the Federal Penitentiary Service, turned the country's prison system into his personal cash cow. Reimer was found guilty of embezzling millions of dollars by inflating the costs of electronic monitoring bracelets for prisoners. While inmates suffered under harsh conditions, Reimer and his associates lived lavishly. His arrest in 2015 sent shockwaves through Russia, revealing the deep levels of corruption within the penal system. In the United States, the abuse of power by prison officials has often been tied to the privatization of prisons. One of the most notorious cases involved Warden William "Billy" McFarland, who oversaw the Walnut Grove Youth Correctional Facility in Mississippi. Reports exposed that McFarland had turned the juvenile prison into a breeding ground for violence, sexual assault, and drug trafficking. Under his leadership, guards were encouraged to turn a blind eye to gang fights and even participated in the abuse of minors. A federal investigation eventually led to the facility's closure, but McFarland himself escaped serious punishment. In Venezuela, corruption in prisons reached unimaginable levels under the watch of Warden Wilmer Brizuela, a former inmate-turned-prison boss. Instead of controlling crime within the facility, Brizuela ran it like a cartel, using his connections to smuggle in weapons and drugs. Prisoners under his command lived in luxury with access to nightclubs, swimming pools, and even pet tigers, while others were subjected to extreme violence. His reign ended in 2016 when he was assassinated, likely by rival criminal factions who saw him as a liability. The Philippines has also seen its fair share of corrupt prison wardens, with one of the most infamous being Rafael Ragos, a former officer in charge of the New Bilibid prison. Ragos was accused of accepting bribes from high-profile drug lords in exchange for allowing them to continue their operations behind bars. Under his watch, the prison became a hub for drug manufacturing and distribution, with some inmates even running multi-million-dollar drug empires. His eventual confession to his crimes exposed just how deep corruption ran in the country's prison system. Perhaps one of the darkest examples of warden corruption took place in Thailand at the Bang Kwang Central Prison, also known as the Bangkok Hilton. Warden Songchai Nyamam was found to have been running a human trafficking operation from within the prison walls. Inmates, particularly women, were forced into prostitution, while others were sold to criminal organizations. Those who refused to cooperate were subjected to brutal beatings or left to rot in inhumane conditions. When the scandal finally broke, Songchai fled the country, leaving behind a legacy of unimaginable cruelty. The corruption within prisons is not just limited to individual wardens, but often extends to entire systems. The case of Curtis Mallet, who ran the Rikers Island Correctional Facility in New York, highlights this problem. Under his leadership, the prison became infamous for its extreme levels of violence, with reports of inmates being beaten to death, sexually assaulted, and subjected to psychological torture. Mallet was accused of covering up these abuses, allowing his officers to operate with impunity while profiting from illegal contracts with private vendors. In Mexico, the corruption within the prison system is deeply intertwined with cartel influence. One of the most notorious wardens, Enrique Perez Salazar, was found to be working directly with drug cartels, allowing them to use the prison as a recruitment center and operational base. Under his rule, inmates had access to luxury accommodations, drugs, and even weapons. When he was finally arrested, authorities discovered secret tunnels leading from the prison to cartel hideouts, proving the extent of his criminal dealings. Even in countries with strict laws, corruption in the prison system finds a way to thrive. In Japan, Warden Satoshi Miyake was exposed for running a black market organ trafficking ring from within his prison. Desperate inmates were coerced into selling their organs in exchange for better living conditions or reduced sentences. The scandal shocked the nation and led to widespread reforms, but many believe similar operations continue in secret. These cases highlight a harsh reality. Prisons, meant to serve as institutions of justice, can easily become breeding grounds for corruption and crime. The wardens in charge, given unchecked power over some of society's most vulnerable individuals, have the potential to become criminals themselves. The lack of oversight, combined with the lucrative opportunities that come with controlling a prison, has led to some of the most horrifying abuses of power in history. When wardens turn corrupt, they not only betray the trust of the public but also contribute to a cycle of crime that extends far beyond prison walls. Many of the criminal empires that exist today were born within the confines of these corrupted institutions, where powerful inmates and equally corrupt officials work together to build fortunes through illegal means. Some of the world's most infamous drug lords, gang leaders, and financial criminals started their rise to power from within the walls of corrupted prisons. With the right connections and enough money, an inmate can turn a prison into their personal headquarters, directing operations with little interference. This is only possible when those in charge, the wardens, allow it to happen. The extent of corruption varies from warden to warden, but in many cases, they are willing to grant inmates extraordinary privileges in exchange for bribes. Some wardens have been caught allowing prisoners to use cell phones, access the internet, or even have family members visit in secret, all while keeping up the appearance of a strict facility. In some prisons, high-profile inmates live better than the guards themselves. Reports have surfaced of inmates dining on gourmet meals, drinking expensive liquor, and sleeping in air-conditioned rooms while their fellow prisoners suffer in overcrowded, unsanitary conditions. These luxuries are often provided by corrupt officials who are well paid to turn a blind eye. One of the most alarming aspects of prison corruption is the involvement of wardens in organized crime. In many cases, they don't just accept bribes, they actively participate in smuggling operations, drug distribution, and even violent attacks on rival criminal groups. Some wardens have even been caught ordering assassinations from within prison walls. In many cases, these wardens become so deeply entangled in the criminal underworld that removing them from power becomes nearly impossible. If a corrupt warden has the backing of a powerful cartel or gang, any attempt to expose them can be met with violent retaliation. Some journalists and whistleblowers who have tried to uncover these scandals have mysteriously disappeared. A major reason this corruption persists is the lack of oversight in many prison systems. With minimal external scrutiny, wardens often have near-complete control over their facilities. In some countries, government officials and law enforcement agencies are themselves corrupt, ensuring that these prison empires remain untouched. The consequences of corrupt prison systems are devastating. Instead of rehabilitating inmates, these institutions turn them into hardened criminals, ensuring that crime continues long after they are released. In some cases, prisoners come out more dangerous than when they went in, having learned new tactics and formed connections within criminal networks. Even worse, some prisons have become recruitment centers for terrorist organizations. Radical groups have been known to use prisons as a place to find new members, with corrupt wardens allowing extremist leaders to preach and recruit freely. This has led to cases where individuals released from prison immediately carry out violent attacks. Some wardens take their corruption to even darker levels, engaging in human rights abuses that rival the crimes committed by the prisoners themselves. Reports have surfaced of wardens who force inmates into slave labor, subject them to brutal beatings, or sell them to criminal organizations for human trafficking. One of the most disturbing examples involved a prison in North Korea where a warden was accused of conducting medical experiments on inmates. Survivors reported being subjected to chemical and biological testing, with many dying in the process. The full extent of these atrocities remains unknown, as the regime has worked hard to cover up any evidence. Even in more developed countries, corruption in the prison system remains a significant issue. The private prison industry, in particular, has created an incentive for wardens to keep prisons full, leading to cases where inmates are wrongfully kept behind bars for extended periods just to generate more profit. Some wardens have been caught falsifying reports to make it appear as though rehabilitation programs are working, when in reality they are doing little more than warehousing inmates. This has allowed them to continue receiving government funding while inmates receive no real opportunities for education or reform. In extreme cases, wardens have actively incited violence within prisons to justify harsher security measures. By allowing rival gangs to fight, they can then argue for more funding, more guards, and stricter control measures, many of which benefit them financially. This level of corruption doesn't just affect inmates, it also puts prison staff at risk. Honest correctional officers who refuse to go along with corrupt practices are often threatened, attacked, or forced out of their jobs. Some have even been murdered for trying to expose the truth. While some corrupt wardens eventually face justice, many escape consequences altogether. Some retire with full benefits, move into other high-ranking government positions, or even go into politics, using their connections to avoid prosecution. Even when investigations are launched, they are often slow-moving and easily manipulated. In some cases, wardens facing charges simply resign before any real punishment can be handed down, allowing them to walk away without facing jail time. Prisoners who try to expose corruption are often met with severe punishment. Many have been placed in solitary confinement, denied basic necessities, or even killed under mysterious circumstances. Whistleblower inmates rarely receive protection, making it nearly impossible for them to speak out. The international community has tried to address some of these issues, but progress has been slow. Organizations such as Amnesty International have called for prison reforms, but corrupt governments and prison officials continue to resist change. Some countries have implemented stricter oversight programs, including independent prison monitors, surprise inspections, and body cameras for guards. While these measures have helped in some cases, corruption still finds a way to thrive. The problem is not just about individual wardens, it's about a system that allows corruption to flourish. As long as there is money to be made, power to be gained, and little accountability, there will always be wardens willing to break the law for their own benefit. For many inmates, the prison system is less about justice and more about survival. They are forced to navigate a world where violence, bribery, and exploitation are the norm. Those without money or connections suffer the most, while those who can pay their way out receive preferential treatment. Prison corruption also fuels public distrust in the justice system. When people see wardens acting like crime bosses, it becomes harder to believe that prisons serve any real purpose beyond punishment and profit. Some former inmates have come forward with stories of their experiences under corrupt wardens, hoping to shed light on the issue. While their testimonies have sparked some reforms, the deeply ingrained nature of prison corruption makes it difficult to create lasting change. The media plays a crucial role in exposing these cases, but many major news outlets avoid reporting on prison corruption due to political pressures. As a result, some of the most shocking abuses remain hidden from the public eye. Without major systemic reforms, prison corruption will continue to thrive. The question is whether governments and societies are willing to confront the issue head-on, or if they will continue to turn a blind eye. While corrupt wardens benefit from the current system, thousands of inmates suffer. Many of them are not even violent criminals but are serving time for minor offenses, caught in a system designed to exploit rather than rehabilitate. The role of a prison warden is meant to be one of leadership, discipline, and fairness. But in too many cases, it has become a role of exploitation, greed, and unchecked power. The most corrupt prison wardens in history have left behind a legacy of suffering, with countless victims whose stories will never be told. The only way to prevent future abuses is through stricter oversight, accountability, and a commitment to true justice. If history has shown anything, it's that power corrupts, and in the hands of the wrong person, a prison becomes less of a place for justice and more of a personal kingdom of crime. Prison reform advocates continue to fight for change, but they face an uphill battle. With so much money and power at stake, those benefiting from corruption will not give it up easily. Ultimately, the future of prison systems depends on whether society is willing to demand transparency and accountability. Without it, the cycle of corruption, violence, and abuse will only continue. Many inmates enter prison hoping to serve their time and move on, but in the hands of a corrupt warden, their stay becomes a nightmare beyond anything they could have imagined. Justice should not be something that only exists outside of prison walls. If true reform is to happen, it must start from within, holding those in power accountable for their crimes. For every corrupt warden caught, many more continue to operate in the shadows, exploiting inmates and abusing their positions for personal gain. The question remains, how many more hidden atrocities are still taking place behind bars, away from the eyes of the world,